The first time I caught Karen in my pool, I thought I was hallucinating. Picture this. It's a Saturday morning, the sun is already beating down hard, and I step outside with my mug of coffee only to hear giggling, splashing, and the distinct sound of an inflatable flamingo squealing against wet skin. My yard looked like a public water park. My neighbor Karen, in all her neon-pink tracksuit glory, was floating smugly in the middle of my pool like Cleopatra, and her little entourage of middle-aged freeloaders had claimed every lounge chair on my patio. I froze there on the porch, coffee halfway to my lips, wondering if I'd stumbled into some alternate universe where my property deed had been swapped for a community rec center. I wasn't part of the HOA. That's the funny part. This neighborhood technically had a homeowners association on the other side of the main street, but my property sat just outside their boundary. When I bought the house, I actually verified it with the city just to make sure I'd never have to answer to clipboard-wielding tyrant. Karen, unfortunately, had taken it upon herself to extend her empire past the invisible HOA border, and somehow my pool ended up in her list of community perks. She was the president of the HOA, and clearly thought the title came with feudal rights over land and water. At first, I tried being civil. I walked down the steps and told them they were trespassing. Karen sat up in her float and gave me the kind of smirk you usually see in used car salesmen who know the odometer's been rolled back. She said, "Don't be so selfish. It's just water. You should be proud the neighborhood gets to enjoy your pool." Proud. As if I'd built the pool not for me, not for my sanity in the sweltering summers, but as a civic donation. She waved her hand like she was cutting a ribbon at some grand opening ceremony. Her friends laughed and popped open another round of cheap wine coolers. That was the first moment I realized Karen didn't just want to use the pool. She wanted to own the narrative. In her mind, she was the benevolent queen granting the peasants a place to swim, and I was the ungrateful subject daring to question her. I didn't scream, though I wanted to. Instead, I said flatly, "This is the last time." She chuckled, told me not to be dramatic, and promised to keep it down as if noise was the issue. I turned and went back inside, already planning. By the following week, it got worse. I'd head out to mow the lawn and find kids I didn't know, doing cannonballs. Their parents, half drunk, lounged in the shade with their phones out like they were at a resort they'd paid for. Every time I confronted Karen, she'd spin some justification. "The neighborhood needs this," she'd say. "It's safer for kids to be here than running around in the streets." Or my personal favorite, "The HOA has agreed your pool is now part of our community facilities." The HOA. That mythical bureaucracy that held no power over me but apparently thought it could rewrite property lines by sheer force of entitlement. I called the police once. That's when I learned how deep Karen's network went. An officer showed up, listened to my complaint, and then asked if I had any signage posted. No trespassing, private property, that kind of thing. Technically, I didn't. The cop gave me a shrug like his hands were tied and said it'd be easier if I just worked it out with the HOA. I wanted to scream. I didn't need to work it out. I needed the law to back me up. But Karen had a way of convincing everyone she was the victim of my stingy, antisocial attitude. I realized quickly that authority wouldn't help me. If I wanted them gone, I'd have to do it my way. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work and found Karen giving what I can only describe as a poolside sermon. She was standing at the shallow end, holding a wine glass like it was a microphone, lecturing her friends about how community spirit was being eroded by selfish people. She glanced at me when I walked past, and the jab landed. I didn't answer. I just stared at the patches of sodden grass, the trail of wet footprints leading into my house where someone had clearly gone to use my bathroom, and the mess of chip bags and soda cans littering my patio. That night, while scrubbing Dorito dust off my outdoor furniture, I remembered a detail my father used to drill into me. People only learn when consequences are personal. Karen wanted to control the pool? Fine. I'd make the pool a battlefield she couldn't win. I stayed up until 2 in the morning researching pool chemicals, safe levels of chlorine, and the delightful effects of overexposure. I wasn't planning on harming anyone, just letting nature and chemistry play their part. Too much chlorine dries out hair faster than a desert wind. Combine that with a little copper sulfate and you get green tints that no salon can fix. It wouldn't hurt them, but it would leave a mark. By Friday the stage was set. I balanced the chemical levels perfectly for safety, then added just enough copper to ensure anyone who swam regularly would start noticing unfortunate side effects. Sure enough, Saturday morning rolled around, and Karen was back, front and center, hair tied up in her usual stiff bun. She strutted around my pool deck like she was hosting a country club gala. I watched from my kitchen window as she climbed into the water, smirking, raising her arms like she was blessing the peasants. It was almost cinematic. The first couple of dips went unnoticed. She came back Sunday, then Monday, then every day after that, her smug grin widening as more neighbors joined in. I bided my time. The trick with revenge is patience. You want them confident, comfortable, blind to the storm building above them. And then, just as you predicted, the lightning strike. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was pulling into my driveway when I heard it, the shrill, blood-curdling scream of a woman whose world had just collapsed. I rounded the corner and there was Karen, dripping wet, clutching her hair in horror. The bun had come undone, and her once carefully dyed blonde locks now hung in stiff, frizzy clumps, straw-like, brittle, with streaks of swampy green glinting in the sunlight. Her friends gasped, some trying not to laugh, others whispering like they were at a funeral. Karen looked up at me, eyes wide, face twisted in betrayal, as if I'd personally sabotaged her crown jewels. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. I didn't flinch. I set down my briefcase, took a slow sip of coffee, and answered with the calmest sarcasm I could muster. "I told you this was the last time." She stormed out of the pool, leaving puddles behind her, screaming about lawyers and property rights and medical bills for her hair trauma. But the real damage had already been done. Karen's hair, her pride, her vanity, her symbol of control, was ruined. And the best part? I hadn't touched her. The pool had. As she stomped away, towel wrapped around her straw-like hair, I couldn't help but smile. This was only the beginning. The morning after Karen's meltdown, I walked outside to find a small crowd gathered at the edge of my driveway. It wasn't the usual joggers or dog walkers passing by. These were neighbors I hadn't seen before, whispering to each other, sneaking glances at my backyard gate like they were waiting for a performance. And in a way they were. Karen had made a public spectacle out of her hair disaster, and now the entire neighborhood seemed to think my pool was the site of some kind of chemical warfare. I didn't engage them. I pretended not to notice, carried my coffee to the porch, and sat down with the newspaper as if everything was perfectly normal. But the whispers carried. I caught fragments: dangerous, lawsuit, revenge. Someone even said, "I heard he poured acid in there." I almost laughed out loud. Acid. As if I'd risk prison just to stop a few trespassers. But that was Karen's genius. She never attacked directly. She planted seeds, spun stories, and let the gossip grow until the truth was buried under a tangled hedge of lies. By noon, Karen herself appeared, wrapped in a silk scarf and oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She looked like a B-list celebrity dodging paparazzi, except her entourage was 3 disgruntled neighbors carrying lawn chairs like they were staging a sit-in. She marched straight to my porch without knocking. "We need to talk," she announced, standing over me like she was delivering a court summons. I lowered my paper slowly and met her gaze. "Do we?" "Yes," she snapped. "The HOA had an emergency meeting last night, and it's been decided that your pool poses a health hazard. Until you can prove otherwise, it is to remain closed to all community members." That was rich. My pool, closed to the community. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Let me get this straight. You and your committee of trespassers held a meeting about property that doesn't belong to you, and now you're issuing decrees. Her mouth twitched. It's not trespassing if the community benefits. And don't try to play innocent. You deliberately tampered with the pool chemicals to injure me. Injure you? I asked, fighting back a grin. You mean your hair? Gasps erupted from her friends. One muttered, "That's cruel," as if I'd kicked a puppy. Karen's jaw clenched. My stylist says it could take years to repair the damage. Do you understand the financial and emotional toll you've caused? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that forces people to reveal more than they intended. Sure enough, Karen filled the gap. If you don't compensate me for treatments, I'll have no choice but to take this to court. There it was. Not about safety, not about community, about money and power. Karen had lost face, and she wanted me to bankroll her comeback. I stood, slow and deliberate, and stepped closer. Karen, if you set foot in my pool again, I'll call the police. And if you file a lawsuit, I'll counter for trespassing, theft of utilities, and harassment. Now leave. Her lips curled into a smug little smile. We'll see what the judge says. Then she turned on her heel, her minions trailing after her like ducklings, whispering about strategy. I should have been rattled. Lawsuits aren't cheap, even when you win. But instead, I felt oddly calm. Karen thought she'd scared me with the threat of legal action. What she didn't know was that I'd already started keeping a file. Dates, times, photos, even a log of items stolen or broken. My insurance agent had advised me to document everything months ago. The evidence was stacked neatly in a binder on my desk, waiting for the day Karen finally pushed too far. Still, her visit marked a shift. Up until then, Karen had been freeloading. Annoying, sure, but predictable. Now she was escalating, and that meant I needed to escalate too. So I started thinking less like a neighbor and more like a chess player. The first move was psychological. Karen thrived on the idea that she had power over me, that she could bend the narrative. So I decided to take that away. I hired a local pool company, not the one Karen's friends used, but a competitor. 2 men in bright uniforms came the very next morning, testing the water, adjusting levels, and leaving behind a spotless receipt clearly labeled "safe for recreational use." I pinned that receipt to my front door with a thumbtack, angled perfectly so any passerby could read it. By noon, the crowd was back. Whispers shifted. It says safe. Maybe Karen exaggerated. I didn't need to say a word. The receipt spoke louder than any argument. Karen showed up again that evening, scarf even bigger, sunglasses darker. She yanked the receipt off the door and crumpled it in her fist. You think you're clever, she hissed. But you can't fool everyone forever. Funny, I replied. I was about to say the same to you. Her face flushed red, and for the first time I saw it, the crack in her armor. Karen wasn't invincible. She was just loud. But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next weekend, I woke to find a stack of flyers shoved under my door and taped to my mailbox. Bold black letters screamed "Community Alert, Unsafe Pool, Unsafe Owner." Below it was a blurry photo of Karen's ruined hair, looking more like a haystack than anything human. She'd distributed these flyers across the neighborhood, branding me a chemical terrorist. That should have been the moment I exploded. But instead I laughed. Because tucked at the bottom of each flyer, in smaller print, was the giveaway: attend HOA meeting this Tuesday to discuss sanctions. It wasn't about safety. It was about power consolidation. Karen wanted to turn my humiliation into her re-election campaign. So I went. Not because I cared about the HOA. I wasn't even under its jurisdiction, but because Karen was banking on me not showing up. She wanted an empty chair to point at, a villain absent to defend himself. Instead, I walked into that meeting hall wearing my calmest smile and carrying my binder of evidence. The room buzzed with chatter as I sat down. Karen froze mid-speech, her cue cards fluttering in her hand. She tried to recover, launching into a rant about negligent pool maintenance, chemical burns, and community endangerment. But when she held up one of her flyers as evidence, I stood and calmly placed my pool company's certified report on the table. The effect was immediate. People leaned forward, murmuring, some even chuckling at the contrast between Karen's dramatics and the cold, professional report. I didn't say much, just a few pointed questions. Do you see my name on your HOA rolls? No. Do you see any legal jurisdiction over my property lines? No. So what exactly are you voting on here? By the time I sat down, Karen looked less like a queen and more like a cornered cat. She wrapped her scarf tighter and glared daggers at me, but the damage was done. Her narrative was crumbling. As I left that night, a neighbor I barely knew patted me on the shoulder and whispered, "About time someone stood up to her." That was when I realized this wasn't just my battle. Karen had been running her little fiefdom unchecked for years, and the cracks were starting to show. Back at home, I sat by the pool under the glow of the patio light. The water was calm, pristine, shimmering like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. Karen wouldn't let it go. She couldn't. She needed control like a shark needs water. And if she couldn't control the pool, she'd find another way to sink her teeth in. The first sign that Karen wasn't done came on a quiet Wednesday morning. I had just stepped outside to water the rosebushes along my driveway when I noticed the faint hum of machinery. At first, I thought a neighbor was running a lawnmower, but the sound was too steady, too mechanical. Then I saw it, a group of men in reflective vests unloading tools from a van parked across the street. They weren't the usual landscapers. These guys had clipboards, tape measures, and a level of authority that made my stomach tighten. Before I could ask what was going on, Karen emerged from her house across the street, strutting like she owned the place. She marched over to the crew, her scarf trailing behind her like a cape, and began pointing toward my yard. One of the men nodded, jotting something down. Another unrolled a large blueprint across the hood of the van. I walked over. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. The tallest of the crew glanced at me, then back at Karen. She interjected before he could answer. "Don't worry, everything's under control. The HOA has authorized a safety inspection of your property." "My property?" I asked. "Funny, because last I checked, I'm not under your HOA." Karen tilted her head, smiling as if I were a confused child. "That's where you're mistaken. After the community voted last night, your property was provisionally annexed. That means your pool and yard are now subject to HOA oversight." I couldn't help laughing. "Annexed? What is this, a medieval kingdom? You can't just vote to seize property." The crew leader finally spoke up. "We've been contracted to perform an inspection. If you'd like to dispute jurisdiction, that's between you and them. We're just here to do our job." I almost admired the audacity. Almost. Karen had actually convinced a group of contractors to treat her little HOA like it had government powers. I folded my arms. "Unless you have a court order or city authorization, you're not stepping foot on my property." Karen's smile faltered. "Refusing an inspection will only make you look guilty. And when this ends up in court, the judge will see you have something to hide." That was her move. Intimidation by paperwork, the threat of legalese. I didn't budge. "Then I'll see you in court." With that, I turned and walked back to my porch, leaving the contractors awkwardly shuffling their clipboards. After a few tense minutes, they packed up and drove off, muttering about wasted time. Karen stood in her driveway, fuming. Her scarf slipped in the breeze, revealing the brittle tufts of her ruined hair. She yanked it back into place and shouted, "This isn't over." Of course, it wasn't. That was only the beginning. The next week turned into a campaign of harassment. Flyers appeared again, this time accusing me of running an unlicensed public facility and endangering children with toxic waste. Neighbors I'd never spoken to avoided eye contact, whispering when I passed. One even asked me point-blank if I was planning to sell, as if Karen's propaganda had already pushed me out the door. But I wasn't going anywhere. If anything, her desperation only steeled my resolve. I doubled down on documenting everything. Every flyer I collected went into the binder. Every unwanted trespasser I caught on my security cameras got their still photo printed and logged. I even started keeping voice recordings of Karen's rants whenever she cornered me in the driveway. It wasn't long before Karen escalated again. One evening, I came home to find my pool cover slashed clean down the middle. The knife marks were obvious, straight, and deliberate. My stomach sank, but my face stayed neutral. Rage wouldn't help me now. I grabbed my phone, took photos from every angle, and called the police. The officer who showed up was the same one from before, clearly tired of the feud. "Any witnesses?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, handing him a USB stick with my latest batch of security footage. "But my cameras might tell a different story." He took it reluctantly, muttering something about neighbor disputes and civil courts. I could tell he didn't expect much. But I knew Karen was sloppy when she got emotional, and slashing my property had definitely rattled her composure. 2 days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The officer confirmed that the footage showed a woman, late 40s, average build, wearing a scarf, sneaking into my yard at dusk. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Karen's scarf collection was practically her signature. I half expected them to arrest her on the spot. Instead, the officer sighed and said, "We don't have a clear face match, so it won't hold up in court. But we'll file an incident report." Translation: nothing would happen. That's when I realized Karen's greatest weapon wasn't her voice or her flyers, it was the system's apathy. She thrived because most people didn't want the hassle of fighting her. She weaponized bureaucracy, red tape, and indifference. If I wanted to win, I couldn't rely on the system. I had to beat her at her own game. So I started planning. If Karen wanted to frame me as reckless, I'd flip the script. I reached out to the city health department, requesting an official inspection of my pool. The inspector arrived 2 days later, clipboard in hand, running every test imaginable. By the time he left, he'd given me a signed, stamped certificate of compliance, proof that my pool was safe, clean, and up to code. The very next day, I made 20 color copies and hand-delivered them to every house in the neighborhood. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The official letterhead and city seal spoke louder than any flyer Karen had ever printed. By evening, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors thanking me for clarifying. One even apologized for believing Karen's rumors. Another asked if I'd consider hosting a proper pool party, something official, not the free-for-all Karen had been running. I declined, but the point was clear. Her credibility was slipping. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She stormed onto my porch the following morning, waving one of my copies like it was forged. "You think this changes anything?" she snapped. "People know what you did to me. No certificate can erase the truth." I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my coffee. Funny. I thought truth was supposed to be backed by evidence. Guess I was wrong. Her face twisted with fury. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." And then she left. No entourage, no scarf flourish, just a stiff march back across the street. That night, as I sat by the pool with the certificate framed on my patio wall, I knew the war wasn't over. Karen wouldn't stop until she regained control. But something had shifted. For the first time, the neighborhood was starting to see through her act. She had tried intimidation, sabotage, and propaganda. None of it had worked, which meant her next move would have to be bigger, riskier, more desperate. And that, ironically, was exactly what I wanted. Because the bigger Karen played, the harder she would fall. It started with the sound of engines. Not the quiet hum of a lawnmower or the rumble of a delivery truck, but the growl of multiple SUVs idling outside my house. I peeked through the blinds and nearly choked on my coffee. Karen had staged what looked like a siege. 4 vehicles lined the curb, hazard lights flashing, trunks open and spilling out folding chairs, coolers, and inflatable toys. And at the center of it all was Karen herself, scarf pinned tight around her head, oversized sunglasses masking her face, barking orders like a general on the battlefield. Within minutes, my yard was invaded. Kids I didn't know scrambled through the side gate, cannonballing into the pool like they'd been waiting all summer for this moment. Parents set up lawn chairs on my grass, spreading towels across the fence like it was a beach cabana. Someone even rolled in a portable speaker, blasting pop music so loud the windows rattled. It wasn't trespassing anymore. This was a full-blown occupation. I stormed outside. Get out. All of you. Karen stood on the diving board, arms outstretched, soaking in the cheers of her little audience. Welcome to the neighborhood, Perk, everyone. Don't mind the grumpy landlord. He's just upset we voted him out of his own property. The crowd laughed, some nervously, some genuinely. I raised my voice. You don't have the right to be here. Karen smirked. Actually, I do. The HOA has declared this a community amenity. And if you try to remove us, you'll be facing harassment charges. It was insanity. Pure, entitled insanity. But the way she said it, with so much confidence, you'd think she had a Supreme Court ruling in her back pocket. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. If I tried to drag them out, I'd be the villain. That was Karen's play, force me to overreact, then weaponize it. So I waited. Hours later, when the sun had set and the last of her entourage stumbled home, leaving behind beer cans and muddy footprints, I began my counterstrike. I pulled out my laptop and started uploading footage from every one of my security cameras. The night vision shots of Karen's SUV convoy, the swarm of uninvited guests, her speech on my diving board, all of it went into a neat, unedited compilation. I sent it straight to the city attorney's office with a formal complaint of trespassing and property damage. But I didn't stop there. I uploaded the same video to a neighborhood forum where residents shared everything from lost pets to garage sales. Within an hour, the post blew up. Comments flooded in. Wait, that's your pool? I thought Karen said it was HOA property. She told us you donated it for the kids. This is insane. I can't believe she dragged us into this. The tide was shifting. For the first time, Karen's carefully crafted narrative cracked in public. Of course, she didn't stay quiet. The next day, I woke to find her standing on my porch with a clipboard in hand. She pounded the doorbell until I opened it. You're going to take that video down, she said, voice trembling with fury. Not a chance, I replied. Her jaw tightened. Then I'll sue you for defamation. I raised an eyebrow. Defamation? It's literally video of you trespassing. That's not the point, she snapped. You're making me look bad in front of the community. My reputation. I cut her off. Your reputation destroyed itself the second you decided my yard was a public pool. Her face flushed crimson. She sputtered something about lawyers and cease and desist, then stomped off. I watched her cross the street, her scarf slipping slightly, revealing the brittle mess of straw-colored hair that had started this entire war. The following week was a whirlwind. I received a letter from the city attorney acknowledging my complaint, along with a warning that continued trespassing could result in fines or even misdemeanor charges. The neighborhood forum lit up with debate, some siding with me, others still clinging to Karen's community spirit narrative. But the majority were tired of her antic. That's when Karen pulled her riskiest stunt yet. It was a Saturday afternoon, hot and sticky, the kind of weather that makes you want to live in the pool. I was in my living room when I heard sirens. My stomach dropped. 2 police cruisers rolled up, lights flashing. Officers got out, hands resting on their belt. And behind them, Karen stood with a dramatic expression, as if she'd just witnessed a crime scene. The lead officer approached. Sir, we received a report of a hazardous chemical spill in your pool. Claims of toxic fumes and endangerment of children. I stared at him, then at Karen, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "You can't be serious," I said. The officer sighed. "Mind if we take a look? Be my guest." I led them to the backyard. The pool shimmered, crystal clear, the very picture of perfection. The inspection certificate still hung proudly on the patio wall. I watched the officers exchange glances. One of them tested the water with a portable kit. "Chlorine levels are fine. No unusual readings. Water's safe." Karen's act crumbled. She dropped the tissue and shrieked, "You're testing the wrong part. He hides the toxins at the bottom." The officer gave her a long, unimpressed look. "Ma'am, there's nothing hazardous here. Making false reports wastes department resources. Don't do it again." Her jaw dropped. "False report? I'm the victim here." But the officers weren't buying it. They got back in their cruisers and drove off, leaving Karen standing in my yard, humiliated. I couldn't resist twisting the knife. Straw hair, false reports, and now public embarrassment. Rough month, huh, Karen? She spun on me, eyes blazing. "You think you've won? This is bigger than you realize. I'll make sure you regret ever moving here." Then she stormed away. That night, as I sat by the pool, I reflected on her word. Bigger than me? What did that mean? Was she planning another stunt, or was this just another empty threat? Either way, I knew one thing. Karen had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd weaponized the police, tried to turn the law into her personal club, and it had backfired. But something told me she wasn't finished. If anything, the humiliation would only drive her deeper into obsession. She needed to reassert control, to remind the neighborhood that she was still the queen bee. And the more she scrambled, the closer she came to destroying herself. I didn't have to rush. All I had to do was wait, document, and let Karen's desperation do the rest. The pool glistened under the moonlight, calm and still. A battlefield, yes, but also my sanctuary. And as long as I kept my patience, it would remain mine. For now. The week after Karen's police stunt felt eerily calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. Neighbors went about their business as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the undercurrent. People were waiting for Karen to strike again, waiting to see how I'd respond, waiting for the next round in a battle that had turned our street into its own reality show. And Karen, true to form, couldn't survive without the spotlight. Her next move revealed itself on a Saturday morning. I woke to hammering, loud and deliberate, coming from just beyond my fence. I stepped outside and nearly dropped my coffee. Karen and a small crew of volunteers were erecting what looked like a wooden kiosk at the end of my driveway. It had a cheap canvas awning, a fold-out counter, and cherry on top, a giant laminated sign reading, "Neighborhood Pool Sign in Station." I stared, stunned, as she directed people to nail the structure into the strip of grass that technically belonged to me but sat close enough to the sidewalk that most wouldn't question it. She had even laid out clipboards, pens, and a donation jar labeled, "Maintenance Fund." Kids were already lining up with towels over their shoulders like they were about to check into summer camp. I walked over, keeping my voice measured. "Karen, what is this?" She turned, smiling with that politician's grin. "Community organization. We're formalizing the pool as an HOA amenity. This sign-in station ensures safety, accountability, and, most importantly, funding for maintenance. You should be thanking me." I blinked. "You built a kiosk at the end of my driveway and set up a donation jar for my pool without asking me?" Her eyes flashed. "Our pool," she corrected. "The neighborhood deserves this. I'm simply making it official." I could have lost it right there. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone, snapped a few photos, and walked back inside without another word. Let her bask in her delusion. I had a better plan. By noon, the kiosk was buzzing. Families I'd never met were strolling into my yard like they'd just paid for resort passes. Karen hovered proudly, collecting donations and scribbling notes on her clipboard. The audacity was breathtaking. But so was the opportunity. I dialed the city's code enforcement office, explained the situation, and emailed the photos. The response was swift. By late afternoon, a white city truck pulled up, and a man in uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand. I watched from my porch as he examined the kiosk, scribbled notes, and shook his head. Karen hurried over, waving her arms, trying to charm him with her usual theatric. But charm doesn't work on someone whose job is to enforce building code. Within 20 minutes, the kiosk was declared an unauthorized structure on private property. Karen was ordered to dismantle it immediately or face fines. Her face burned crimson as neighbors looked on, whispering. She tried arguing, blaming me, blaming community necessity, but the officer wasn't swayed. By sunset, the kiosk was in splinters, tossed into the back of her SUV. I thought that might end it, but Karen wasn't wired to retreat gracefully. Losing face only fueled her obsession. The very next day, I caught her sneaking along my side yard with a measuring tape, jotting notes like a surveyor. When I confronted her, she claimed she was verifying boundary lines for annexation. Annexation, again. I told her plainly to leave or I'd call the police. She smirked and walked away, but I knew she was already scheming her next angle. It arrived the following weekend in the form of an open house. Karen distributed glossy flyers, professionally printed this time, announcing a community pool showcase. The flyer boasted free snacks, music, and a raffle, scheduled for Saturday afternoon, at the neighborhood pool. No address was listed, but everyone knew what that meant. By noon on Saturday, my street was clogged with cars. Balloons bobbed from mailboxes. A food truck idled at the corner. Music blared from portable speakers. And worst of all, strangers, people from outside the neighborhood, were flooding into my backyard. Karen had turned my home into a carnival. I stormed outside, demanding everyone leave, but the crowd drowned me out. Kids splashed, parents danced, and Karen, standing on my diving board with a megaphone, announced raffle winners like she was hosting a county fair. Enough was enough. I pulled out my phone and called the police. Again. This time, luck was on my side. A different pair of officers arrived, older, no-nonsense, clearly unimpressed by Karen's theatric. When she tried to spin her story about community property, they shut her down. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're trespassing and you're organizing an unauthorized event. Shut it down, now." Karen sputtered, shrieked, even tried to pull rank by flashing her HOA badge like it was a police shield. The officers didn't buy it. They ordered everyone to leave immediately or face citations. The crowd dispersed in a wave of groans and grumbles, but I noticed more than a few neighbors glaring at Karen as they packed up. She had promised them a community celebration and delivered a humiliation. As the last car pulled away, Karen stood in my yard, shaking with rage. She whipped off her sunglasses, revealing eyes rimmed with desperation. "You're destroying this neighborhood," she spat. "Do you understand that? Without me, this place will fall apart." I tilted my head. "Funny. It looks like it's falling apart because of you." She let out a strangled scream, then stormed off, scarf flapping like a battle flag. That night, I sat by the pool, exhaustion settling in. Karen had escalated from flyers to sabotage to false police reports to full-blown event. Each failure only pushed her further into chaos. And though I had the law, the city, and even some neighbors on my side, I knew she wasn't finished. She couldn't be. Karen thrived on control, and losing it was killing her. The next move wouldn't be public. That much I was certain of. She'd already tried grand gestures and been humiliated. No, her next move would be quieter, more desperate, something designed to hurt me personally. And that, in a strange way, was more dangerous, because if Karen stopped caring about appearances, then she had nothing left to lose. As I looked out at the calm water, I realized the war had entered its final stage. And I'd need to be sharper, colder, and more patient than ever if I wanted to end it on my terms. The pool lights flickered against the surface, throwing ripples of silver across the patio. It was beautiful, serene. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was watching from across the street, plotting her next desperate play under the cover of darkness. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The calm before Karen's next storm lasted less than a week. At first, I thought she had finally run out of steam. The street was quiet, no flyers appeared in mailboxes, no makeshift kiosks sprouted at the edge of my driveway. For a moment, I almost let myself believe she'd given up, licked her wounds, and moved on. But Karen wasn't built that way. Losing face only sharpened her claws. And when she came back, it wasn't with another carnival or a police stunt. It was something smaller, meaner, and far more personal. It started with my mail. One morning, I opened my box to find it empty. Not unusual, except I'd been expecting a package. The tracking number said it had been delivered the day before. I asked the carrier, who swore he'd dropped it off as usual. Over the next few days, more things went missing: utility bills, letters, even a small Amazon order. At first, I thought it was theft by some random porch pirate, but then I noticed the pattern. Every missing envelope was something important, stuff that would make my life harder if I didn't catch it in time. My suspicion became certainty when I found one of the missing envelopes half buried in the bushes near Karen's property. It had been ripped open, the contents gone. I photographed it, bagged it in a Ziploc-like evidence, and added it to my binder. Karen had moved from public humiliation tactics to covert sabotage, the kind designed to frustrate me into mistake. Next came the noise. Every night, like clockwork, Karen's house erupted with racket, car alarms, leaf blowers, even what sounded like metal pipes clanging together. The timing was always precise. Just after midnight, just enough to jolt me awake. I tried earplugs, white noise machines, even sleeping in the back room, but nothing blocked it completely. She wanted me tired, irritable, worn down. Then, one evening, I came home to find my garbage cans overturned, trash strewn across the lawn. At first, I thought a raccoon had gotten into them, until I saw the neat, deliberate cuts in the plastic lid. Someone had sliced them open with a knife. And there, half buried in the mess, was a single flyer from Karen's failed community pool showcase, folded neatly like a calling card. She wasn't just attacking me. She was leaving her signature. I didn't retaliate, not directly. That's what she wanted. Instead, I upgraded my security system. Motion-activated floodlights, extra cameras, cloud backup. If Karen so much as sneezed in my direction, I'd have it on video. I also contacted the post office and filed a complaint about tampered mail. The Inspector General's office took it seriously. Mail tampering is a federal crime, and even Karen wasn't immune to that. A few days later, my hunch paid off. My cameras caught her creeping along my driveway at 2 a.m, scarf pulled tight, gloves on her hands. She rifled through my mailbox, clearly looking for something. The footage was perfect, clear, undeniable. I emailed it straight to the postal inspectors. But before the consequences could land, Karen escalated again. It was a Saturday morning when I noticed something odd about the pool. The water looked murky, not the usual crystal blue. A faint chemical smell hung in the air, sharp and wrong. I tested the levels immediately, and my jaw clenched at the results. Someone had dumped detergent, or worse, into my pool. Foamy residue clung to the filter, and the pH balance was through the roof. Karen had poisoned the water. Not enough to be deadly, but enough to ruin the system and force me into hundreds of dollars of repairs. I sat there staring at the foamy mess, my fists clenched, rage boiling under the surface. This time, though, I wasn't alone. A neighbor from 3 houses down wandered over, saw the suds floating across the pool, and frowned. "What happened here?" "Karen," I said simply. His eyebrows shot up. "You're kidding." I showed him the footage from the mailbox incident. He whistled low. "She's lost it." Word spread fast. Neighbors started coming by, offering their own stories. Someone's garden had been trampled. Another family had their tires mysteriously slashed. A third swore their outdoor furniture had gone missing, only to see it later on Karen's patio. It was like a floodgate had opened. Everyone had been dealing with her nonsense, but no one had wanted to be the first to speak up. Now, with evidence piling up, people were ready to talk. That evening, a small group gathered on my patio. We shared stories, traded proof, and came to a collective decision. It was time to end Karen's reign. Not with shouting matches or flyers, but with cold, hard evidence delivered to the right authorities. I compiled everything: my binder, the footage, the tampered mail, the destroyed garbage cans, the poisoned pool. The others added their own photos and testimonies. Together, we built a case so airtight even Karen's theatrics couldn't puncture it. But before we could submit it, Karen made her boldest move yet. I woke up one morning to find a "for sale" sign planted in my yard. At first, I thought it was a prank. But then I saw the smaller print: "Contact HOA office for details." She had actually listed my house as available, without my knowledge, without my consent. Neighbors later told me she'd been spreading rumors that I was moving out, that I'd finally seen reason, and decided to surrender the pool back to the community. It was surreal. People actually stopped by asking about the price, wandering onto my lawn like prospective buyers. One even peeked through the windows before I chased him off. Karen had turned my life into a circus. I called the city again, filed another complaint, and ripped the sign out of the ground. But I knew this was the final straw. Karen wasn't going to stop until someone stopped her. That night, I sent the complete case file to the city attorney, the police department, and the postal inspector. I CC'd every neighbor who had contributed. The subject line was simple: ongoing harassment by HOA president. The responses came faster than I expected. The city attorney scheduled a hearing. The postal inspector confirmed they were opening a criminal investigation. And the police, who had brushed me off before, suddenly seemed very interested in taking statements. Karen had crossed the line from annoying to criminal. And soon, she would finally face consequences. As I sat by the pool, the water still cloudy from her sabotage, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Not because the war was over, it wasn't, not yet. But because for the first time, it wasn't just me against Karen. It was the neighborhood, the city, and the law all lined up against her. And Karen, for all her bravado, wasn't ready for that. The question wasn't whether she'd fall. It was how spectacularly she'd crash when she finally did. The day of Karen's downfall began deceptively ordinary. The sky was clear, the neighborhood was quiet, and for once there wasn't a flyer taped to my mailbox or a stranger splashing in my pool. I almost allowed myself to believe she'd finally burned herself out. But I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. And sure enough, by mid-morning, the storm broke. It started with a knock on my door. Firm, deliberate, and followed by the unmistakable shuffle of official shoes. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there, not the ones who had dismissed me months earlier, but the same no-nonsense pair who had shut down Karen's pool showcase. One of them asked to speak with me privately. My stomach tightened. For a second, I wondered if Karen had somehow twisted everything and gotten them to come after me. Instead, they asked me to confirm my name, then handed me a copy of a complaint. "We've received substantial evidence regarding harassment, property damage, and mail tampering directed against you and several other residents," the officer said. "We'll be visiting Ms. Karen Johnson today to follow up." I almost laughed in disbelief. It was happening. After months of playing defense, the system was finally catching up with her. I offered to provide additional footage, but the officer shook his head. "We have plenty. You're not the only one who submitted evidence." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just me anymore. The neighborhood had turned. By noon, the street buzzed with tension. Neighbors lingered on porches, pretending to garden or wash cars, but their eyes were fixed across the road at Karen's house. Her curtains twitched every few minutes. She knew. Word had spread too quickly for her not to. And then it happened. 2 marked cars pulled up, followed by a city attorney's sedan. Karen emerged onto her lawn before they even knocked, scarf wrapped so tight it looked like armor, sunglasses perched on her nose despite the shade. She carried a folder thick with papers, waving it like a shield. "You can't do this," she shrieked, before anyone had spoken. "I am the president of this HOA. I have jurisdiction. This is harassment." The attorney's voice was calm, measured, and devastating. "Ms. Johnson, you are under investigation for criminal mischief, mail tampering, and abuse of authority. We have affidavits from over a dozen residents, corroborated by video evidence. Please step aside." Neighbors began drifting closer, drawn like moths to the flame. Phones appeared, recording. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing the audience she craved was now the very mob ready to watch her fall. She doubled down. "This is a smear campaign. She pointed across the street at me, is the real criminal. He poisoned me. He sabotaged the community. He turned everyone against me." The attorney didn't flinch. "Ms. Johnson, your accusations have been reviewed. They are unsubstantiated. Continuing to make false claims will only worsen your case." Karen's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "You don't understand. Without me, this neighborhood will collapse. I built this place. I kept it safe. I gave them everything, and this is how they repay me. It might have been tragic if it weren't so ridiculous." Standing there, her hair fried to straw under the scarf, her reputation in shreds, her voice echoing with hysteria, she looked less like a queen defending her throne and more like a child refusing to let go of a toy. The officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." She froze, clutching her folder tighter. "No. You can't make me. This is illegal. I'll sue all of you." But when one officer gently but firmly took her elbow, the fight drained out of her. The folder slipped from her hands, spilling papers across the lawn, flyers, fake annexation documents, even mock contracts where she had scrawled signatures over neighbors' names. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in, capturing everything. And that was it. The moment her empire collapsed. Not with a bang, but with a pathetic flurry of forged paperwork fluttering in the breeze. They escorted her to the car, her scarf slipping, revealing the brittle clumps of her ruined hair. She tried to hide it with her hands, but the cameras caught every angle. The woman who had thrived on image, control, and fear was reduced to a viral spectacle in her own front yard. When the cars pulled away, the street erupted. Neighbors cheered, clapped, some even hugged each other. A few approached me, thanking me for standing my ground, for refusing to be intimidated. But I shook my head. I didn't bring her down. She did. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. Without Karen's constant meddling, people seemed lighter. Driveways were less tense, conversations warmer. The HOA still existed, but stripped of its tyrant, it functioned like it should. Modest, organized, focused on landscaping and holiday decorations instead of personal vendettas. As for me, life finally quieted. No more midnight noise campaigns, no more strangers in my pool, no more fake for sale signs. The binder of evidence sat on my desk, a grim reminder of how far things had spiraled. But I never threw it away. Every so often, I'd glance across the street at Karen's house, now noticeably quieter. Word was she'd hired lawyers, but her cases went nowhere. The charges weren't heavy enough to land her in prison, but they were enough to bankrupt her reputation. She became a recluse, rarely leaving her house, her once proud scarf and clipboard routine reduced to nothing. The irony was almost poetic. Karen had tried to make my pool the centerpiece of her power, her neighborhood perk, her crown jewel. And in the end, it was that same pool that destroyed her. The chemicals, the cameras, the neighbors rallying together, it all circled back to the water she tried to steal. One evening, months later, I sat on the patio watching the sunset glint off the calm surface of the pool. For the first time in a long time, it felt truly mine again. No trespassers, no circus, no war. Just peace. I thought about Karen then, about how people like her aren't born villains. They're born insecure, desperate for control, addicted to the idea that they matter more than everyone else. Maybe she believed her own lies, maybe she really thought she was protecting the neighborhood. But entitlement doesn't excuse destruction, and power built on fear always eats itself alive. As the street lights flickered on, I realized the strangest part of all. I didn't feel victorious. There was no triumphant rush, no gloating satisfaction. Only relief. Relief that it was over, that sanity had returned, that I could finally live in my own home without bracing for the next ambush. I raised my glass to the water, watching the ripples dance in the fading light. "Here's to peace," I muttered. And to straw hair as a warning sign. The pool stayed calm. The neighborhood stayed quiet. And Karen, at long last, was history.